Exactly 3 years ago, on February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine confident and certain of a three-day victory. They claimed Kyiv would fall within 72 hours. 3 years later, Russia controls just 20% of Ukraine and has suffered nearly 1 million casualties more than the U.S. lost in 2 decades of the War on Terror. And now, according to the Institute for the Study of War, Russia captured only 4,200 square kilometers last year, slightly larger than Rhode Island. That's just 0.6% of Ukraine. Independent estimates show that at this rate, Russia would need 230 years to occupy the entire country and suffer around 100 million casualties. This is far from a strategy. It's a disaster. So why doesn't Russia stop? Why don't they pull back and regroup and reassess? Well, we can think of 4 reasons why. First, Putin cannot afford to lose. Losing would mean admitting defeat, which would be a blow to his ego and could damage his power base. It would also hurt Russia's status and influence. Second, the Russian military cannot end the war without losing face. Admitting defeat means acknowledging incompetence, corruption, and the military's failure to modernize. This will harm future recruitment and make it harder to project power. Third, Putin cannot negotiate peace. Accepting a peace deal would mean conceding that the invasion was a mistake, something he has never done. He would lose domestic and international support and be seen as weak. And finally, Russia cannot pull back without giving up territory. Retreating would involve giving up occupied areas, which would undermine the invasion's purpose and justify Ukrainian attacks on remaining Russian areas. Basically, Russia is trapped by its own strategy. This isn't a new situation. Back in September 2022, I made a video titled, "Why Russia Cannot Win in Ukraine," where I discussed these same issues. And so here we are 3 years later, still talking about the same thing. But the stakes keep getting higher and the losses keep getting bigger. At the start of the war, Russia had around 1 million active soldiers. Today, only 830,000 remain. Some are in Ukraine, others are guarding Russia's borders, keeping ethnic minorities in check, and maintaining internal security. Over 920,000 men have fled conscription since the war began. Most went to neighboring countries, while millions more avoided the draft through bribes, health issues, or by simply hiding. In October, Putin announced partial mobilization, calling up 300,000 reservists to fight in Ukraine. But even this wasn't enough. Russia is running out of soldiers to send to the front. With an aging population and declining birth rates, Russia's pool of available soldiers keeps shrinking. Recent reports indicate that Russia is now looking to inmates as a desperate measure to fill its ranks. According to media reports and Kremlin statements, thousands of prisoners have been offered freedom in exchange for 6 months of fighting in Ukraine. If this is true, it shows how dire the situation has become. And if these reports are exaggerated or false, well, that's good. It means Russia isn't really doing it. We don't know how many Russians have died in Ukraine, but some numbers might give us an idea. According to U.S. officials, Russia has lost approximately 15,000 troops in Ukraine since the invasion, 15,000 in 3 years. By comparison, the U.S. lost around 15,000 soldiers in Afghanistan over 10 years. That's 60 times more in 3 years. Russia also spent vast amounts of money on the war. It spends 40% of its government budget on defense, which is twice the average of the next highest military spender. To put this into perspective, Russia spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. Sanctions have also crippled its high-tech sectors, pushing Russia towards becoming a low-tech, low-growth economy. For example, the automotive industry collapsed by 75% in 2022 due to a lack of microchips. And even basic industries like metal products and chemicals faced big declines. As a result, manufacturing shrank from 18% of GDP in 2021 to just 12% in 2022. And this trend continues today. Russia's economic lifeline, energy exports, is also under pressure. In December, the EU agreed to phase out 90% of its Russian crude imports and all refined products like diesel and jet fuel. For example, by 2024, Russian oil production will fall by 1 million barrels per day, and this will reduce Russia's main source of income, trade balances, which reached almost $236 billion in 2022, down from $392 billion in 2021. Most of Russia's profits come from Europe, which pays higher prices for natural gas. Asia, meanwhile, buys Russian oil at steep discounts, so it's not as profitable. And to top it off, global demand for fossil fuels is falling thanks to renewable energy. In 2021, Russia earned $280 billion from energy sales. But last year, that number dropped to $230 billion. And this trend will likely continue in the coming years. And all of this means that Russia's economy is bleeding fast and cannot sustain the war indefinitely. In fact, the Russian economy is already in recession, with GDP contracting by 2.2% last year. Unemployment is expected to reach 9% in 2023, double the current level. Industrial production fell by 2.5% in November, the seventh decline in 8 months. Inflation hit 12%, the highest level in 16 years. And consumer confidence is at its lowest point since records began. But the pain goes beyond numbers. Sanctions and self-imposed isolation have cut Russia off from key technologies, markets, and raw materials. Instead of weakening NATO, Russia has strengthened it. Finland and Sweden have joined. Germany has increased defense spending to 2% of GDP and aims to become Europe's largest economy by 2030. Poland has pledged to build Europe's largest army and become a key weapons supplier to Ukraine. And most importantly, public opinion has shifted dramatically. Back in March 2022, 58% of Europeans viewed NATO favorably. Today, that number is closer to 70%. Likewise, support for Ukraine has increased from 55 to 79%, and this has huge implications for the future of the war. Russian propaganda has created the illusion of a strong military, but the reality is very different. At the start of the war, Russia's military was the world's second largest. Today, it's hollowed out and unable to fight effectively. Old tanks like the T-62 and T-34 are being used. Advanced tanks like the T-90M and T-72B3 had fake armor. Stealth jets like the Su-57 have barely flown, and old aircraft like the Su-25 and MiG-29 are being used in large numbers. And instead of focusing on quality, Russia has sent wave after wave of poorly trained and equipped soldiers to their deaths. Many of them are teenagers or elderly men with no business being in a war zone. And the reason for this is simple. Russia has run out of soldiers and is desperate to keep fighting. But it's not just about the military. Russia's entire system is under strain. Senior advisors admit that Russia underestimated Ukraine and overestimated its own power. Putin's personal obsession with Ukraine is risking the entire regime. Economic breakdown, rising casualties, and political fragmentation could lead to infighting among the elite and possibly the collapse of the Russian state itself. In fact, such rumors are already circulating. Last month, General Sir Jim Hockenhull, commander of UK Strategic Command, warned that Putin's grip on power is weakening, and the chances of a palace coup are increasing. Of course, we don't know if this is true, but the idea of a palace coup isn't as far-fetched as it may seem. After the invasion, Putin's approval rating jumped to 83%, but it's been steadily declining ever since. Last summer, 59% approved of the war, but that number dropped to 44% in November. And this is a big problem because popular support is essential for Putin's power. Historically, Russian leaders maintained control by sharing the spoils of war with their elites. But this war isn't bringing in any rewards. On the contrary, it's costing billions of dollars and causing economic hardship. So if the war continues, the incentive for a palace coup will grow. To sum up, Russia is trapped by its own strategy. It cannot win without full mobilization, but mobilization requires accepting defeat and starting over. This war has lasted longer than anyone anticipated. And so far, Russia has achieved very little while losing men, money, and credibility. This war exposes the gap between projected military power and actual performance. Russia's mistakes have reshaped Europe's military and geopolitical landscape with long-term consequences for its own survival. I'm the host. Thank you for watching.